She stood silently in her old jacket as the billionaire's son mocked her. Then an entire mountainside collapsed, burying a family. While the boy who owned the world froze in fear, a general's voice cut through the chaos. "Clear a path! Sergeant Vance is in command now." What they didn't know, the woman they ignored was a rescue legend, and they were about to see why her enemies called her Valkyrie. The Rocky Mountains wore winter like a crown of diamonds. At 10,000 feet, nestled in a pristine valley, the Ethelgard Lodge stood as a monument to rustic opulence. Its massive timber beams and floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered breathtaking views of a world painted in white and silver. The air was thin, cold, and so clean it stung the lungs. A perfect escape for those who could afford to outrun the world. Kaylin Vance, however, wasn't running from anything. At 35, she moved with an economy of motion that bordered on unnerving. Her beauty was sharp and classical, with high cheekbones and clear, pale skin. A cascade of raven black hair was pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun at the nape of her neck. Dressed not in a uniform, but in worn denim jeans and a fitted brown leather jacket that had seen better days, she looked more like a local than the lodge's head of safety. Her focus was absolute as she ran a gloved hand along a tension gauge for the main ski lift, her gray eyes missing nothing. Inside the grand hall, laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Jackson Sterling, the 25-year-old heir to the sterling fortune that owned this mountain paradise, lounged by the fire. He was handsome in a polished, effortless way, his blonde hair perfectly tousled, and his designer ski gear probably cost more than Kaylin's monthly salary. He watched her through the panoramic window, a smirk playing on his lips. "Look at Calamity Kaylin," he drawled to his equally privileged friends, probably checking if the mountain is still attached to the earth. His companions chuckled. "I swear she's preparing for an apocalypse. What's the worst that can happen? Someone spills their hot chocolate?" For them, Kaylin was a specter of unnecessary caution, a stark reminder of rules in a place designed to have none. Her rounds took her to the lodge's quiet, book-lined library. A fire crackled softly in the hearth. In a worn leather armchair sat Elias Thorne, a man in his late 30s whose gentle eyes held a permanent shadow of exhaustion. He was a writer, a widower, with a kind face that seemed more suited to dusty archives than a billionaire's playground. He was trying to soothe his daughter, Lily, who was curled on his lap. At 8 years old, Lily was a miniature version of her father, with the same thoughtful eyes and brown hair. But her skin was pale, and a faint wheezing sound escaped her with every breath. The altitude was constricting her asthmatic lungs. Fear began to cloud her small face as her breathing grew more difficult. Seeing the girl's panic, Kaylin changed course. She moved silently, her presence barely registering until she knelt beside the chair. She didn't look at Elias. Her entire focus was on the child. "Hello, Lily," she said, her voice unexpectedly soft. "Want to play a game with me? Let's pretend we're blowing out the biggest birthday candles in the world. Breathe in slow while I count to 4. 1, 2. Her calm voice was a lifeline. Lily's wide, frightened eyes locked onto hers. Kaylin's confidence was infectious. She guided the girl through the breathing exercise, then helped a grateful Elias administer the portable nebulizer from their bag. While the mist did its work, Kaylin pointed out the window. "See those tracks?" she whispered, her finger tracing a delicate pattern in the snow. "That's a snowshoe hare, and over there, a weasel. He's hunting." Elias watched her, fascinated. He had only ever seen the cold, efficient safety officer. This woman, who could command a child's fear away and speak the secret language of the snow, was someone else entirely. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, seeing a warmth in her that he was sure no one else, least of all Jackson Sterling, ever bothered to look for. Later that afternoon, the televisions in the lodge began broadcasting urgent alerts. A meteorologist pointed to a swirling vortex on the weather map. "A historic blizzard is moving in," he announced gravely. "We are predicting unprecedented snowfall and hurricane-force winds. All mountain passes will be closed within the hour." A wave of excitement rippled through the guests. Being snowed in at a 5-star resort was an adventure, a story to tell. But Kaylin felt a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She walked briskly toward the staff corridors, her mind already cataloging emergency supplies. Backup generators, medical kits, food rations. Jackson saw her pass, her face a mask of grim purpose. He rolled his eyes. "There she goes," he said with a laugh, "off to save us all from a little snow." The storm did not arrive, it attacked. What began as a gentle flurry transformed into a furious white-knuckled fist that hammered the Ethelgard Lodge. Then came the sound, a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the very bones of the building. It wasn't thunder, it was the mountain shedding its skin. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the opulent hall into primordial darkness, lit only by the dying embers in the hearth. The terrified silence was shattered by a collective gasp, followed by screams. Jackson Sterling stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief in the gloom. The world he controlled had just vanished. But as chaos erupted, Kaylin Vance became a beacon of absolute calm. "Everyone, away from the windows! Now!" Her voice wasn't a shout, but a command that sliced through the panic. "Find cover under tables or in the interior hallways. Staff, get a head count of your sections immediately." Instinctively, people obeyed. Her authority was primal and undeniable. Within minutes, a frantic staff member found her, his face pale. "Two guests. They're not accounted for. The writer, Elias Thorne, and his little girl. Someone saw them walking toward the scenic cabin an hour ago." Kaylin's blood ran cold. The scenic cabin, a small, beautiful structure perched on a ledge overlooking the valley, was directly in the Avalanche's path. Without a word, she turned and moved with purpose through the panicked crowd, heading for her small staff quarters. She was not alone. Observing from the shadows near the library entrance was a man in his early 60s, with a ramrod-straight posture that defied his age and expensive cashmere sweater. His hair was silver and neatly trimmed, and his eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, seemed to assess everything with a practiced, strategic gaze. This was General Marcus Thorne, retired, a guest who valued his anonymity. He recognized the disciplined efficiency in Kaylin's movements. The gait of a soldier. He followed her. Kaylin kicked open her door, grabbed a worn tactical backpack from her closet, and pulled out a rugged satellite phone. She was extending the antenna when she saw the general standing in her doorway. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition on his part, a flash of guarded annoyance on hers. She ignored him and dialed. Her voice was clipped, professional, stripped of all emotion. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is call sign Valkyrie. I am a former pararescue master sergeant at the Ethelgard Lodge. Coordinates 40.7128 north, 105.8219 west. We have been hit by a major avalanche. Power and comms are down. I have 2 civilian non-combatants, 1 a child, presumed trapped or buried. I am commencing a lone SAR operation, requesting immediate air support and medical evac at first light. Acknowledge." She snapped the phone shut and shouldered her pack, turning to leave. Jackson, having found some courage, blocked her path, flanked by 2 other guests. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his voice shaky. "You work for me. You can't just leave. It's a suicide mission." Before Kaylin could answer, General Thorne stepped forward, his presence filling the narrow hallway. "Stand down, son," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of 1,000 commands. Jackson faltered. "Who are you?" "That doesn't matter," Thorne said, his gaze fixed on Kaylin with a mixture of pride and concern. He then turned his steely eyes on Jackson. "What matters is that you are trying to stop Master Sergeant Kaylin Valkyrie Vance. She is not just your safety officer. She is one of the most decorated pararescue jumpers the Air Force has produced in a generation. I know because I had the honor to be her commanding officer. The lives of everyone here, including that father and his little girl, may very well depend on her. So, you will get out of her way, and you will do exactly as she says." The hallway went utterly silent. Jackson stared, his jaw slack, his arrogant smirk replaced by a look of profound, humbling shock. The woman he'd dismissed as Calamity Kaylin was a legend. He had been mocking a hero. Kaylin gave the general a curt, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. then pushed past the stunned Jackson and disappeared into the howling blizzard. The world outside the lodge was a formless, roaring whiteness. The wind tore at Kaylin with the force of a physical blow, and shards of ice peppered her face. She was a solitary figure moving through a maelstrom, her path lit only by the narrow beam of her headlamp. She moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, plunging a long, thin probe into the snowpack every few feet, sweeping her avalanche beacon in a steady arc. Each step was a calculation of risk. Each breath was a victory against the cold. Back in the lodge, the stunned silence Kaylin left in her wake was broken by General Thorne. He put a firm hand on Jackson's shoulder. "She gave you a mission, son. It's time to carry it out." For a moment, the old, arrogant Jackson flickered. Then, the weight of the general's words and Kaylin's trust settled on him. Before she had stepped into the storm, she had turned to him, her eyes cutting through his shock. "The ballroom," she had said, her voice sharp and clear. "Turn it into an infirmary. I need blankets, first aid kits, hot water. Keep these people safe, Jackson. Can you do that?" It was the first time anyone had asked him to be responsible for something other than himself. He nodded, not to the general, but to the memory of her command. "Right," he said, his voice finding a new, unfamiliar firmness. "Everyone, listen up." He began organizing teams, his directions echoing Kaylin's own efficiency. He was no longer the resort owner's son. He was the man in charge, a role he now understood was earned, not inherited. Out in the blizzard, the physical struggle was nothing compared to the war in Kaylin's mind. The howl of the wind began to sound like the scream of incoming artillery. The biting cold felt like the dust and grit of a Kandahar desert. The memory she had buried for years clawed its way to the surface. Afghanistan. A sun-scorched village under siege. She and her partner, Master Sergeant Ben Hawk Carter, were tasked with rescuing a family from a half-demolished compound. Hawk was everything she wasn't. Loud, optimistic, with a reckless grin and a belief that they could outrun any devil. He was her balance, her brother in arms. The memory played out in agonizing detail. The firefight, the smell of cordite, the desperate cries of a child from within the crumbling structure. "I'm going in, Valkyrie!" Hawk had yelled over the noise. "Cover me!" He had gone in. Kaylin, ever the strategist, had hesitated for a single, fatal second, her eyes scanning the cracked support beam, assessing the risk. In that second, the world had exploded. A second RPG had struck the building, and it had imploded into a cloud of dust and rubble. She had dug with her bare, bleeding hands, screaming his name until her voice was raw. But there was nothing. Her hesitation, her second of doubt. That was the ghost that haunted her. The failure that had driven her from the sky and into the quiet prison of the mountains. A sharp, insistent beep from her beacon ripped her, back to the present. A signal, close. She followed it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. And then she saw it. The scenic cabin, or what was left of it. It was a ruin of twisted timber and shattered glass, half buried under a tomb of snow and uprooted pine trees. The site was so eerily similar to the compound in Afghanistan that for a moment she couldn't breathe. The past and present had collapsed into a single, terrifying reality. She was frozen, not by the cold, but by the memory of her failure. Then she heard it. A faint, muffled moan from deep within the wreckage. A sound of life. It was the same choice, the same test. The ghost of Hawk whispered doubts in her ear, but the sound of the living was stronger. Kaylin took a deep breath, raised her tactical shovel, and began to dig. Kaylin tore away a shattered section of the cabin wall and squeezed through. Inside was a scene of devastation. Elias was pinned by a heavy beam, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face pale and beaded with sweat. But Kaylin's eyes went straight to Lily. The little girl was unconscious in her father's arms, her chest still, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. Her crushed inhaler lay on the floor nearby. The ghost of Afghanistan screamed in Kaylin's mind. Failure, too late. She pushed it away. As she unzipped her medical kit, she whispered into the roaring wind, a promise to the man she had lost. "Not this time, Hawk. I'm not hesitating." With the focused precision of her training, she assessed the situation. Lily's airway was closed. There was only one option. Her hands, steady and sure, selected a sterile scalpel and a narrow tube from her kit. For a moment, the faces of the child in Kandahar and the girl in her arms merged. But this time, there was no doubt, only purpose. She made the incision. As she secured the emergency airway, a small, wheezing breath filled the tiny space. It was the sound of victory. She worked quickly, stabilizing Lily before turning to Elias, splinting his leg with a broken piece of a chair and some tactical straps. The journey back was a grueling ordeal against the dying storm. She half-carried, half-dragged Elias, while Lily was secured safely to her chest in a thermal blanket. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she pushed onward, fueled by a purpose she hadn't felt in years. As the first light of dawn broke, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of pink and gray, the silhouette of the Ethelgard Lodge appeared through the swirling snow. A group was waiting outside. Jackson stood at the front, his face etched with worry. As Kaylin stumbled the last few feet, he and others rushed forward to help. I'm sorry," Jackson managed to say, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at the exhausted woman who had saved them. "We didn't know. Thank you, Kaylin." A few days later, the mountain passes were clear. Elias, his leg in a cast, found Kaylin watching the now peaceful landscape. Lily, her cheeks rosy again, ran to Kaylin and hugged her tightly. "You saved my entire world," Elias said simply, his hand resting on Kaylin's shoulder. In that moment, the hole in Kaylin's heart felt a little smaller. That afternoon, Jackson and General Thorne approached her. "I was a fool," Jackson began, his gaze direct and sincere. "This mountain needs more than a safety officer. It needs a guardian. I want to fund a permanent, fully equipped mountain rescue team, and I want you to lead it." Months later, the Ethelgard Mountain Rescue was a reality. Kaylin stood on a ridge, no longer in a leather jacket, but in the practical professional uniform of her new command. She was teaching a group of volunteers, including a humbled and dedicated Jackson Sterling, how to read the signs of an impending avalanche. She was no longer hiding. She was leading. She had found a new way to serve, a new family, and a new peace. Valkyrie had finally come home, not from a war, but to the quiet, majestic mountains that had healed her. The story of Kaylin Vance teaches us a profound lesson. Sometimes the greatest trials we face are not meant to destroy us, but to reveal who we were always meant to be. You could call it a miracle that she was there at that exact moment, with those exact skills. Or you could call it the work of God, who never promises to stop the storm, but promises to give us the strength to walk through it. God placed Kaylin in that storm, not just to save a family, but to give her a chance to heal the wounds of her own past. He turned her greatest pain into her greatest purpose. In our everyday lives, we may not face literal avalanches, but we all face our own storms. We all carry skills we've learned and scars we've earned. This story is a reminder that your past, with all its trials and triumphs, has uniquely prepared you for this moment. The strength you hold, even the strength you hide, might be the very thing someone else is praying for. You have been placed where you are for a reason. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. We would love to read your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. For more stories that uplift and inspire, be sure to subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and keep you safe.